What would you do if the most dangerous man in an entire frontier town was bought out of a hanging by a silent native woman no one dared to look in the eye? They called him a savage cowboy. They called her a fool. And they believed the wild black horse chained beside him would tear anyone apart who came close. But when she stepped forward and said, "I'll buy him," and his horse, the town froze, because what happened next shattered every lie Red Mesa had been built on. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Stay with me, because what unfolds after that moment will change everything you believe about loyalty, justice, and the price of freedom. Now, let me tell you the story. The midday sun punished the dusty heart of Red Mesa, beating down on the auction yard until the red earth shimmered like iron, fresh from the forge. Heat rolled off the ground in trembling waves, carrying the smells of sweat, horsehair, and cheap whiskey. The townspeople gathered shoulder to shoulder, crowding the wooden rails as if some grand entertainment were about to begin. Some came hoping to buy something useful at a good price. Most came for the spectacle because in Red Mesa, there was nothing people enjoyed more than watching another human being brought low. Men already half drunk by noon perched on the fences, hooting and whistling as the auctioneer slammed his gavel against a cracked plank table. Horses whinnied nervously from their pens, spooked by the noise. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Everything about the scene felt less like a marketplace and more like an arena where cruelty was the main attraction. In Red Mesa, an auction wasn't just business. It was a public shaming and invitation for the crowd to enjoy someone else's fall. And today, the fall would be spectacular. Two deputies dragged Caleb Holt into the center of the yard, the chains around his wrists clanking with each step. His shirt was torn, his jaw bruised from days locked in a cell, but nothing about him looked broken. His shoulders were square, his stride steady. Even with shackles pulling at his arms and the sun burning into his back, Caleb Holt's eyes held the same cold defiance they always had. The moment the crowd saw him, chaos erupted. "There he is," someone shouted. "That savage cowboy hanging would have been faster. Sell him for scrap." Laughter spread like wildfire. The deputies shoved him forward until he stood beside the auction table. Sheriff Grady raised his voice, turning slowly so everyone could hear. "Caleb Holt," he announced, "convicted of killing a man in a saloon brawl, now forfeited to the town of Red Mesa. He is hereby listed as seized property and put up for auction." Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't bow his head. He didn't give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing fear in his eyes. His stillness only made them jeer louder. To them, Caleb Holt wasn't a man. He was a thing, an object to mock, to spit on, to buy and own. And Red Mesa delighted in owning people. A sudden metallic crash turned every head. A heavy iron cage dragged by 4 struggling men screeched across the yard. Inside, a massive black stallion hurled itself toward the bars with terrifying force. The cage shuddered each time the animal made contact, as if the stallion might rip it apart through rage alone. Ash. The beast was infamous, even beyond Red Mesa. Big as a bull, black as night, and mean enough to kill 3 men who had tried to break him. His eyes burned with feral fury, red-rimmed and wild. Every stomp of his hooves rattled the planks beneath him. One of the handlers stumbled backward when Ash snapped at him, sending the crowd into delighted shrieks. "That demon's killed more men than Holt has," someone yelled. "Put the monster down," another cried. "No one in their right mind would buy that thing." Sheriff Grady lifted his chin. "Second lot this here is the black stallion, Ash. Untamable, dangerous, owner deceased. By law, he is to be auctioned along with the prisoner." People gasped. Together? "That's insane. You'd have to be suicidal." Grady smirked. 2 pieces of trouble. 1 price. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Just then a rider approached on a tall bay horse, the crowd parting with murmurs of recognition. Harold Whitcomb, the wealthiest landowner in the region, a man whose shadow was long enough to twist the whole town. Whitcomb dismounted with calculated ease, brushing dust from his pristine boots. His eyes locked on Ash with something between greed and hunger. "I'll buy the stallion," he said. But that man, he flicked a hand at Caleb as if brushing lint from his coat. "Throw him away." People laughed loudly, echoing his contempt. Sheriff Grady crossed his arms. "Package deal. Take both or take none." Whitcomb curled his lip. "I don't bargain for trash, Sheriff. The cowboy stays in the dirt where he belongs." Caleb stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. Ash continued slamming himself against the cage, rattling the bars hard enough to shake dust loose. Grady lowered the price once. No takers. He lowered it again. Silence. A man near the back shouted, "Drop it to nothing, Sheriff. No one wants junk like that." Mockery rippled across the yard like a windstorm. The sun pressed down harder, the dust thickened, and the scene took on a cruel theatrical energy. Red Mesa didn't come to buy. They came to watch a man be humiliated until even the flies pitied him. Caleb's expression didn't change. Stillness was the only rebellion he had left. Then a soft disturbance at the far edge of the crowd. Footsteps. Slow, steady, unhurried. People shifted aside as a young native woman walked through them, a long braid swinging down her back, a woven shawl around her shoulders. Her face was calm, too calm for a place like this. Some townsfolk whispered and sneered. "A red leaf girl. What's she doing here? She should have stayed in the mountains." She walked until nothing separated her from the front row. Her dark gaze swept across the yard, first Caleb, then Ash. The air tightened. Sheriff Grady frowned. "Can I help you, miss?" The woman didn't hesitate. Her voice carried clearly across the stunned crowd. "I'll buy him. And his horse." Silence. A silence so absolute that even the dust seemed to freeze in the air. Then the explosion came. Laughter, mockery, shouts. She's lost her mind. A native woman buying a white cowboy. "This is the funniest damn thing Red Mesa's seen in years." Grady stared at her as if she'd announced she wished to buy the sun. "You're buying trouble," he warned. She held his gaze unblinking. "I know exactly what I'm buying." Her name, though few in Red Mesa knew, it was Ayanna Redleaf. She stepped forward and placed a pouch of money on the auction table. More than the asking price. More than Whitcomb would have offered for Ash alone. Grady hesitated, trapped by the law he pretended to uphold. The law said that if someone paid, the sale stood. He nodded reluctantly. In full view of the stunned crowd, he unlocked Caleb's shackles. Metal clattered to the ground. Caleb flexed his wrists, staring at Ayanna, as if trying to understand the shape of this moment. Nothing in his life had prepared him for it. But the true shock came next. Ayanna approached the iron cage. Ash, mid-lunge, froze. His hooves scraped against the ground as he stopped so abruptly the cage seemed to lean forward. The wildness in his eyes faltered. When she reached out a hand through the bars, the beast lowered his head slowly, reverently, until her palm touched the hot, trembling place beneath his jaw. The crowd collectively sucked in a breath. No one had ever made Ash bow. No one had ever survived standing this close. A whisper spread like wildfire. "It can't be. He's..." Listening to her, that a monster never obeys anyone. Caleb stared too. Something fragile flickered in his eyes, recognition, disbelief, maybe even the faint stirrings of hope. Whitcomb, watching from his horse, went pale. His jaw tightened, and a thin line of rage carved across his face. He leaned toward his hired gunman and muttered, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Then he turned his horse sharply and rode away, fury trailing behind him like a storm cloud. Ayanna released Ash and stepped back. The stallion remained calm, ears flicking toward her like he had made some silent decision of his own. Caleb met her gaze. For the first time that day, something shifted inside him. Not trust, not yet, but something close to the memory of it. Why would a native woman risk everything to buy a white cowboy the whole town had already condemned? And why did his wild horse recognize her before anyone else did? Tell us what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most powerful part of the story. The crowd scattered slowly after the auction, though their whispers clung to the air like dust that refused to settle. Even as people drifted back toward the saloon, the mercantile, or their wagons, they kept glancing over their shoulders at the three unlikely figures walking away from the auction yard. "That horse will kill her," someone muttered. "They won't last till sundown," another said, shaking his head. Caleb heard every word, even though he pretended not to. He walked several paces behind the native woman Ayanna, who moved with a strange kind of calm, as though she knew the desert better than she knew the town she'd just defied. Ash followed at her side without a rope, without force, without fear. The wild black stallion who had nearly torn through steel earlier that morning now walked quietly, occasionally brushing her sleeve, as though the two had known each other far longer than a few minutes. It made Caleb uneasy. He watched the pair, woman and horse, trying to make sense of it. Nothing about the moment fit the world he knew. Horses like Ash didn't bow their heads for anyone, and women like her didn't walk straight into the jaws of Red Mesa and come out unbroken. Ayanna glanced back once. "Can you walk?" Caleb didn't answer. He simply turned away from her and continued forward, refusing to close the distance, refusing to accept whatever strange arrangement he'd been forced into. Distance was safer. Distance kept motives clear. But nothing felt clear now. The desert air shifted as they left the last wooden buildings behind, and Red Mesa slowly shrank behind them like a nightmare retreating at dawn. They followed the narrow trail leading toward the low ridge at the outskirts. Caleb watched Ayanna's shoulders rise and fall with her breathing, watched Ash's ears flick at every sound. The stallion walked as though the world finally made sense to him, as though whatever storm raged inside him had quieted the moment she touched him. Caleb didn't understand it. He didn't understand her. When Ayanna turned slightly and asked, "Are you afraid of me?" the question cut deeper than he expected. "No," Caleb replied. "I'm afraid of people who buy other people." Ayanna's voice remained calm. "I didn't buy you. I bought your choice." Caleb's jaw tightened. No one buys choice. They buy a body, a life, a debt. Ash stepped between them, suddenly forcing Caleb to halt. The stallion's large body blocked the path, his dark eyes fixed on Caleb in a warning that felt almost human. Ayanna rested a hand on Ash's neck. "You don't have to believe me," she said softly, "but you're no longer in chains." Caleb didn't reply, but something flickered in his eyes, something unsteady, almost vulnerable. He quickly turned away before she noticed. They walked on. Behind them, Red Mesa seethed like a kicked anthill. Whitcomb didn't wait long after the crowd dispersed. He strode into the large storage building behind his ranch house, where his hired guns already gathered. Anger radiated off him in thick, palpable waves. He slammed his palm down on the table. "That horse is mine," he growled, "and nobody makes a fool of me in my own town." One of the gunmen hesitated. "We could offer more money," Whitcomb rounded on him. "She's a native woman. I'd sooner let my cattle rot than bargain with her." A different man spoke, older, with a scar across one cheek. "Holt is dangerous. If Holt talks the things he knows, well, the town might start asking questions." Whitcomb's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. so we silence him. He looked around the room, making sure no one dared challenge him. Get the horse back. Kill Holt. And if the woman interferes, clean up the mess. A voice came from the doorway. I'll help with that. Sheriff Grady stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Keeping Red Mesa steady is my duty. I'll make sure no one finds out more than they should. His words sealed the pact. Greed and authority united, sharpening their blades against three unlikely fugitives already fading into the desert horizon. But danger wasn't finished revealing itself. As Whitcomb left the barn, a young gunman squinted thoughtfully. Redleaf, that name she gave. Sounds familiar. The older, scarred man stiffened. It should. Her father was the Redleaf chief, the one we dealt with 10 years back. A hush fell over the group. If she's alive, the older man muttered, then we've got a bigger problem than a horse and a cowboy. The younger one swallowed. So we kill 'em all. Whitcomb didn't even turn around. No loose ends, not this time. Ayanna Redleaf had stepped back into a town that once destroyed her family. And now the town intended to finish the job. The desert cooled as the sun dipped lower, bleeding its colors across the sky. The three travelers walked in the silence, shadows stretching long behind them. The ridge gave way to open land, framed by thorn bushes and wind-shaped rocks. Caleb kept his distance, still fighting the instinct to figure her out before trusting her. Ayanna glanced back occasionally, but she didn't pressure him, didn't prod him with questions. She simply walked unbothered by the silence between them. Ash, however, kept looking at Caleb with sideways glances, silent nudges that made it clear the horse expected him to catch up to walk beside them. Caleb scowled. I'm not used to walking behind anyone. Ayanna didn't break stride, then walked beside me. For half a heartbeat, he almost did, almost stepped up to match her pace. But something tugged him back. Habit, fear, pride, so he stayed behind her. Not because he feared her, but because he wasn't certain yet who she truly was, or who she'd force him to become. They reached a weather-beaten rest stop by nightfall, a collapsed shelter with a rotted roof and a lone beam still upright. Sand piled in drifts around it, and bushes of prickly pear grew in scraggly clusters. The place offered no comfort, but it offered shade, and sometimes that was enough in the desert. Ayanna gathered dry branches and coaxed a fire to life. Sparks rose into the growing darkness. Ash stood close, tail-flicking eyes alert. The stallion rarely settled when danger lurked nearby, and tonight he hovered like a sentry. Caleb sat farther from the fire, knees, bent hand resting near the hilt of his knife. His gaze swept the horizon without pause, scanning shadows out of long ingrained survival habits. Minutes passed without a word. Finally, Caleb spoke, voice low. I don't need a savior, and I don't want to owe anything to a native woman I don't understand. Ayanna didn't look at him. She fed another branch to the flames. I didn't save you, she said simply. I kept a promise to someone who died. Caleb's head jerked slightly, taken off guard. He looked at her for a long moment, trying to decipher meaning behind her calm. She didn't offer any. When you're ready, she said quietly, you'll understand. The fire crackled softly, painting their faces in copper light. Silence thickened between them. Not hostile, not warm, just full of things unsaid. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the leaning timber, eyes reflecting the flames. The desert night wrapped around them, filled with the faint rustle of insects and distant coyote calls. But his thoughts drowned out every sound. He replayed the scene in the auction yard, the moment Ash bowed to her, the moment she spoke on his behalf. The moment she told the sheriff she knew exactly what she was buying. Who was she? Why him? Why that horse? What promise tied her to a stranger's fate? Each question gnawed at him until his hand tightened around the knife hilt. Trust had never come easy. It had kept him alive too many times. Yet somehow, despite everything, he found himself wanting to believe her. And that frightened him more than the outlaws hunting them. Out in the desert, far from the shelter's fading firelight, 4 riders followed the trail of hoofprints and footprints winding through the sand. "Tracks lead to the old station," the older gunman murmured. "We'll catch them before dawn." The youngest snorted. "A half-starved cowboy and a native girl, this'll be over quick." The older man shot him a warning look. "Don't underestimate a red leaf. Their bloodline has a way of turning devils into cowards." The wind carried the faint glow of Ayanna's campfire across the plain. "There," the leader said. "Let's finish it." None of them noticed the black silhouette standing perfectly still atop a ridge-ear's pricked eyes reflecting the moonlight. Ash had been listening long before the men were close enough to see the fire. And the stallion was not about to let danger slip past unnoticed. Morning light poured into the mouth of Dry Gulch like molten gold, illuminating the red cliff walls that towered above Ayanna, Caleb, and Ash as they continued their journey away from Red Mesa. The air was sharp, the wind slicing through the canyon and echoing in long, lonely howls. Sand shifted underfoot, and the shadows clung stubbornly to the edges of the rocky path. Ayanna led Ash without a rope. She didn't need one. The black stallion stayed close to her shoulder, matching her steps with a quiet obedience that still unsettled Caleb, even after a day on the trail. Caleb walked several paces behind, close enough to follow, but far enough to keep boundaries clear. Yet something had changed since the auction. The hostility in his eyes had softened into wary observation. He wasn't fighting her presence anymore, but he wasn't ready to accept it either. As they reached a narrow bend, the canyon wind rose, suddenly swirling around them in a mournful hum. Caleb's voice broke the silence, roughened by days of holding back words he hadn't meant to ever speak aloud. "I didn't kill him." Ayanna immediately turned her expression unreadable but attentive. "I'm listening." For a moment, Caleb said nothing. He stared at the sand shifting beneath his boots, at the jagged cliffs rising around them anywhere but her face. But when he finally lifted his head, his eyes held a rare honesty that almost startled her. "It happened in the saloon," he said quietly. "He was drunk. Mean drunk. Came at me screaming, bottle in his hand, smashed it over the scar on the side of my head." Ayanna noticed Caleb's fingertips instinctively brush the faint line running through his hair. "I grabbed his wrist," Caleb continued, "pushed him back, didn't hit him, didn't need to. He was stumbling already. I just wanted him off me." He exhaled sharply, bitterness twisting the air between them. He cursed me as they dragged him out. Said he'd kill me before the week was done. Caleb's jaw tightened. But he died half a mile from the saloon. After midnight. Somewhere I never even went. Then he said the word softly, almost like a plea he didn't want to admit he needed. "If I killed him." "Why did he die where I wasn't?" Ayanna held his gaze. She had expected anger, pride, maybe even lies. But what she saw was exhaustion, the deep bone-weary ache of someone who'd been accused so many times he almost believed the world would never see the truth. It wasn't the voice of a murderer. It was the voice of a man who had been hunted long before the law ever caught him. And in that moment, something in her shifted. As they continued through the canyon, Ayanna felt her breath catch in her chest. The story Caleb told fit too perfectly into a pattern she knew all too well, one carved into her memory by grief and injustice. Her father's face flashed before her eyes, his voice the night before he died. the fear he tried to hide. Red Mesa buries the truth he had told her, and kills those who dare to dig it up. He'd been charged with sabotage, accused of damaging Whitcomb's property, an accusation so absurd it insulted the very idea of justice. But they made it stick. The sheriff hauled him away without a trial. And within a week, they claimed he'd hanged himself in his cell. Except Ayanna had seen his body. The bruises, the broken arm, the injuries no rope could have caused. Caleb's story held the same markings, the same cruelty, the same corruption, the same cold efficiency in destroying lives that stood in Red Mesa's way. She understood then with frightening clarity, Caleb wasn't just a victim. He was a repetition of her past, a living echo of her father's final warning. Whitcomb wasn't simply greedy. He was cleansing the land of dissent. She felt a chill crawl up her spine, despite the desert heat. If Red Mesa had nearly destroyed her father, then Caleb Holt had never stood a chance. By midday, they reached the river's edge, where the land dipped into a cluster of narrow wooden shacks, homes for the forgotten, the drifting, the poor who lived outside the law and outside mercy. Ayanna guided Ash toward one shack with a crooked door barely hanging from its hinges. "Jonas lived here," she said. "He saw your fight in the saloon, then he vanished." Caleb stiffened. If he vanished, he had a reason. She knocked gently. The door opened a crack, revealing a gaunt man with a badly bruised eye, the skin swollen purple and black. When he saw Caleb, panic flashed across his face. He tried to slam the door shut, but Ayanna wedged her hand into the gap. "We came to hear the truth," she said, her voice even. "Not to harm you." Jonas hesitated, breathing hard. "Truth is what got me beat half to death." Ayanna's eyes softened. "We're not Whitcomb's men." Slowly, painfully, Jonas opened the door wider. The inside of the shack smelled of antiseptic and damp wood. A tiny cot sat in the corner. A lantern flickered weakly. Jonas gestured for them to enter, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "What do you want?" he asked. "Your story," Ayanna said. "All of it." Jonas swallowed hard. And then the dam inside him broke. Jonas sat heavily on the cot, staring down at his hands as though afraid they might belong to someone else. His voice wavered at first, but once it started flowing, it spilled out in trembling waves. "I saw Whitcomb talking to the man Holt fought with," Jonas said. "Behind the saloon, silent, secret-like." He rubbed his bruised eye, unconsciously. "Whitcomb gave him a pouch. Money, I guess." The man looked nervous, really nervous. Jonas imitated Whitcomb's voice, low and threatening. "Do your part and no one will suspect a thing." The words hung thick in the air. Caleb's nostrils flared, but he didn't interrupt. After that, Jonas continued. "Deputies came for me. They dragged me into an alley, beat me, told me if I opened my mouth in court, I'd disappear, just like others who crossed Whitcomb." His voice broke. He pointed at his bruised face. "This is what staying alive cost me." Caleb's fists clenched, knuckles white. Ayanna stepped closer. "Will you testify?" Jonas shook his head violently. "Not while Whitcomb breathes. Not while Grady protects him." His fear was real. His truth was damning. And the trap around them tightened another notch. Night descended fast over the riverside shacks, the last light fading behind distant dunes. Jonas, still trembling, offered them the shack for shelter before retreating to the far corner with his blanket. Caleb lay near the doorway, listening to the rustle of the wind against the broken boards. Ayanna sat beside Ash, whose ears twitched at every nighttime sound. Even resting the stallion radiated alertness. Something snapped outside, a dry twig cracking under pressure. Caleb was on his feet instantly, knife drawn. Ayanna lowered her voice. "Listen." Ash inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. Then his entire body stiffened. With a piercing cry, he reared and struck the ground, his warning slicing through the night like lightning. A bullet tore through the wall, embedding itself in the wooden beam where Caleb's head had been seconds before. Chaos erupted. A figure crouched on the roof rifle, glinting in the firelight. Before the gunmen could fire again, Ash launched himself forward with explosive force, crashing into the wall and sending the man tumbling from the roof with a startled yell. Another attacker burst through the door. Caleb met him mid-charge, fist cracking against the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. A third tried to flank them through the brush, but Ayanna raised her short bow and released an arrow with calm precision. The shaft lodged in the man's shoulder, spinning him backward into the dirt. Gunmen shouted over one another. "Whitcomb wants them dead. Don't let them escape." Ash planted himself in front of Ayanna, stomping the ground so hard it shook the sand, his massive frame forming a living barrier. More shots rang out. Caleb ducked behind a beam, then yelled, "To the river! Move!" Ayanna whistled sharply, a sound Ash responded to instantly. Together, they retreated toward the back exit of the shack as Caleb delivered a devastating elbow to another attacker. The three moved as one Caleb, covering their escape, Ayanna guiding Ash, clearing the path through sheer force. The desert swallowed their footsteps as they fled into the night. They didn't stop until they reached the riverbank, breathless hearts pounding. A boulder provided enough cover to crouch behind while hooves thundered in the distance. The gunmen circled the shacks, but eventually lost the trail. Ayanna's breath shook. "Whitcomb wants us dead, all of us." Caleb nodded grimly. "He wants to silence anything tied to your father, and anything tied to me." He looked at her, then really looked. No coldness, no suspicion, no armor. "We're being hunted. Together." Ayanna's fingers tightened around Ash's reins. The stallion lowered his head, nuzzling her shoulder gently. Caleb placed one hand on the rock, steadying himself, as the truth pressed hard against them. "This isn't about clearing my name anymore," he said quietly. "It's survival." Ayanna met his gaze. "And justice," she added. Ash snorted softly, as if in fierce agreement. Under the moonlit sky, the three of them, outcast, cowboy exiled, woman untamed stallion, realized they had crossed a threshold. There was no going back, only forward. Into danger. Into truth. Into a war Red Mesa had unknowingly started the moment Ayanna said, "I'll buy him," and his horse. Dawn crept over the river like a pale ghost, the first fragile light glinting off the water, where Ayanna, Caleb, and Ash had sheltered after the night's attack. Mist hung low, curling around the rocks and brush, as though trying to hide the violence that had taken place only hours earlier. Ayanna knelt beside Caleb, tearing a strip from her own sleeve to wrap around a shallow cut on his arm. Her hands moved with practiced steadiness. Caleb sat motionless, watching her with a mixture of confusion and something close to reluctance. He wasn't used to anyone tending to him, not without wanting something in return, not without judgment hidden beneath their breath. "Hold still," she murmured. He did, though he couldn't explain why. Ash stood on the ridge above them, ears pricked toward Red Mesa, head ticking with every distant sound. The stallion had not relaxed since the first gunshot the night before. His breath steamed into the cold morning air, nostrils flaring as if assessing threats only he could sense. Silence lay between the three of them, silence forged by fear, by survival, and by unanswered questions that stretched like shadows in every direction. Finally, Caleb asked, "Where do we go now?" Ayanna tightened the last knot in the makeshift bandage. She rose, meeting his eyes squarely. to find the man who knows the rest of the truth. The land shifted as they left the riverside, the terrain rising into a thin patch of woodland, scraggly junipers, twisted cottonwoods, and long wind-swept grass. Ash suddenly halted, muscles coiling. He jerked his head toward a patch of bushes. Caleb's hand flew to his knife. But a voice called out before either could lunge. "Don't shoot. Please, I only want to talk." A man stepped from behind the brush, thin and pale, clutching a leather-bound notebook to his chest, as though it were a shield. His clothes were dusty, and he looked more like a timid clerk than someone wandering through the wild. Ink stains darkened his cuffs, and a pencil poked out of his breast pocket. Caleb raised his blade anyway. "Who are you?" The man lifted both hands shakily. "My name is Elias Boone. I was the record keeper for Yavapai County. I'm not supposed to be here." His eyes darted around anxiously. "Whitcomb and Sheriff Grady cannot know I met with you." Ayanna stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What do you want?" Elias swallowed. "It's not what I want. It's what I must tell you before someone else dies." He opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with neat, meticulous handwriting. Dates, times, signatures, locations, an entire web of meetings and movements captured in ink. The writing itself trembled slightly, as though Elias had copied the entries under duress or in fear. "Look," he said, pointing to a section. 5 hours before the saloon fight, Whitcomb met privately with the victim. Here." He flipped the page. Then he met with Deputy Fowler. Money exchanged from Whitcomb's private land fund. And later that night, another meeting, this time behind the saloon. Caleb leaned in, jaw tightening. "You're telling me he paid that man to start the fight?" Elias nodded slowly. "I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I just recorded what they told me. But patterns reveal themselves, whether you intend them to or not." He closed the book with a trembling sigh. "Whitcomb constructs his enemies. Sheriff Grady sweeps the pieces under the rug." "And why help us?" Caleb demanded. "Because I've stayed silent too long," Elias whispered. "And Red Mesa has buried more innocent people than I can count." He hesitated before continuing, eyes clouded with shame. "I've been threatened, demoted, kept from hearings. They let me record things only because they knew no one would ever see my notes." Ayanna stepped closer. "What exactly is Whitcomb trying to take?" Elias looked up, the truth finally spilling out in heavy, damning words. "Land, tribal land, ranch land, river water rights, anything he can seize, and anyone who resists vanishes." The wind stilled. Even Ash went silent. But Ayanna's eyes darkened, not with surprise, but with recognition. "Vanished," she repeated quietly. Her fingers tightened around Ash's reins. "My father was one of them." Elias blinked. "Redleaf?" "Your father was Chief Redleaf." Caleb froze, realizing for the first time that the name Ayanna carried a legacy far heavier than the woman herself had shown. Ayanna's voice was low, steady, unwavering, as though reciting a story she had forced herself to carry in silence for years. He was the only one who dared challenge Whitcomb. When Whitcomb began seizing the ancestral grazing trails, my father gathered documents, testimonies, maps, proof. He petitioned the county, demanded an inquiry. She looked out across the river toward the town she had left behind as a child. And Whitcomb purchased the county's silence. He bought the sheriff. He bought lies. Caleb and Elias listened in stunned quiet as she continued. "They arrested my father for damaging Whitcomb's property, accused him of killing a steer. They dragged him to jail. 3 days later, they told me he'd killed himself." Elias's face twisted. "I remember that report. I was forced to mark it as suicide." Ayanna's voice trembled for the first time since Caleb had met her. There were bruises everywhere, ribs broken, arms shattered. A rope didn't do that. She steadied herself. Before they took him away, he told me one thing. When you see the innocent crushed the way they crushed me, stand up. The canyon breeze stirred, carrying the weight of her words through the air. Caleb felt something shift inside him, a quiet cracking, the sound of old armor beginning to fall away. He looked at her, not as the woman who bought him, but as someone carrying a wound that mirrored his own. "Ayanna," he murmured, "you bought me because of your father." She met his eyes. "No, I bought you because you were innocent, like him, because Red Mesa cannot be allowed to bury another voice." For the first time, Caleb Holt didn't look away, and in his silence, trust began to form. Caleb sank down onto a flat stone near the riverbank. He stared out at the rushing water as though the current carried pieces of his old life with it. Ash walked over and pressed his head gently against Caleb's shoulder. The gesture cut deeper than words. "I'm used to being treated like dirt," Caleb said softly. "I figured no one would ever believe me again. Maybe I stopped believing myself." Ayanna approached, slowly choosing her words with care. "I don't trust gossip. I don't trust the law in Red Mesa. I trust what I see in your eyes." Caleb turned to her, then truly allowing himself to be seen. For the first time, he didn't mask his uncertainty behind anger or sarcasm. Ash nudged his cheek, and Caleb reached up and stroked the stallion's neck, hesitant at first, then steady. Ayanna watched a small breath escaping her. Caleb Holt, who had met every kindness with suspicion until now, was finally letting a crack appear in his emotional armor. He didn't simply trust her. He believed this fight might be his too. Elias cleared his throat. "If we want justice, we'll have to go back to Red Mesa." Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "Return to the place that wanted me hanging sounds real smart." Ayanna placed a hand on Ash's reins. "We won't go back to die. We'll go back to end this." Elias added, "We'll need witnesses. Jonas will speak if he's protected, and I have the records. Enough to shake the whole county." Ayanna nodded, her decision firm. "Then we go back. No more running." Caleb pushed himself to his feet. "If you're willing to face the ghost of your father, then I'm willing to face whatever they have planned for me." Ash whinnied sharply, tossing his mane as though lending his approval. Elias looked between the three of them, a wrongfully accused cowboy, a woman bearing the legacy of a murdered chief, and a wild stallion that bowed its head only for her. He shook his head in wonder. "Strange," he murmured. "Three souls with nothing left to lose, becoming the last hope of a corrupt town." Caleb didn't disagree. They spent the next hour preparing for the journey. Ayanna checked her medicine pouch, ensuring every herb salve and binding strip was where it needed to be. She secured her short bow across her back and tightened the leather straps on her boots. Caleb sharpened his knife in long, rhythmic strokes, the rasp of steel against stone echoing in the quiet. He pulled Ash's saddle into place, adjusting the girth strap, making sure nothing would slip in the battle or in flight. Elias tucked the journal into the inside of his coat, patting it like a fragile treasure that could change everything. Ash stood beside Ayanna, protective and resolute eyes, fixed on the horizon where Red Mesa lay hidden beyond the hills. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If things turn ugly, you run." "Understand," Ayanna shook her head. "I don't run from the destiny my father left me." Ash pawed the ground, then lifted his head proudly, stepping between them as though claiming both their burdens as his own. Caleb exhaled softly. "All right then. We do this together." Three figures stood against the rising sun, unlikely allies, forged not by chance, but by truth, by pain, and by the shadows cast by a town that thought it owned their fate. They were going back, and this time Red Mesa would answer for everything. Red Mesa looked different in the early morning light, colder, quieter, like a beast waiting for the first sign of weakness to strike. As Ayanna, Caleb, Elias, and Jonas rode into town, every hoofbeat echoed through the main street, as if warning the people inside their homes that the past had finally returned to collect its debts. Ash led the way, black mane rippling in the wind, towering over the two borrowed horses. Jonas and Elias rode. Ayanna sat tall on Ash's back, her expression solemn, her heart steady. Caleb rode just behind her, scanning the rooftops, alleys, and windows, with the instinct of someone who had been hunted too long to ignore danger. By the time they reached the first line of houses, people had begun to gather. Doors creaked open, curtains twitched, children were yanked back inside by frightened parents. The entire main road filled slowly with townsfolk faces, wary, curious, and in some cases, openly hostile. A woman whispered behind her hand, "That native girl came back, with Holt at her side." A man spat into the dirt, "They've come back to die." But when their eyes fell on Elias Boone, riding stiffly with the leather-bound notebook clutched in his hands, confusion spread like ripples across a pond. "What's the county clerk doing here? Why is Boone with them? Something's wrong." By the time the group reached the square, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Sheriff Grady and Harold Whitcomb stood at the steps of the courthouse, waiting like judges at a hanging. Caleb inhaled, once slow and calm. Ayanna felt Ash shift beneath her, sensing danger with every flick of his tail. The storm had begun. Sheriff Grady stepped forward, puffing out his chest and shouting so the entire square could hear him. "Red Mesa does not welcome fugitives, liars, or those who stir rebellion," the crowd murmured. Caleb lifted his chin, voice steady. "I didn't come to stir anything. I came to tell the truth." Elias nudged his horse forward, raising the notebook high. "And I came to present evidence." A ripple passed through the townsfolk. People recognized him, recognized the authority of his job and the neutrality expected of a county record keeper. They knew he didn't travel unless the matter was grave. An old man pushed to the front. "Sheriff, if you've nothing to hide, why not let them speak?" A murmur of agreement followed. Grady's jaw tightened. The tide of doubt had begun to turn. Jonas shuffled forward, his hands trembling so violently, Ayanna had to place a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone?" she whispered. Jonas swallowed hard, then stepped into the center of the square. "I saw the start of the fight," he began. "The victim, he went after Holt. Holt here, he didn't kill him. He shoved him off and walked away." The crowd erupted. "You could have said that earlier," Jonas flinched. "I was beaten until I couldn't see. They threatened to kill me if I talked. You think I kept quiet because I wanted to." His outburst made the crowd gasp. All eyes swung to Sheriff Grady and Whitcomb. Caleb reached forward, steadying Jonas as he nearly collapsed under the weight of his confession. "And there's more," Jonas whispered. "I saw Whitcomb meet the man behind the stables. I heard him say something about finishing a plan. There was money exchanged. I didn't think much of it until he turned up dead." A cold gasp ran through the crowd. Whitcomb's face went white. Ayanna stepped forward and called into the crowd, "Barbara Marney." The mortician hesitated before stepping through the wall of townsfolk. The older woman looked down at her hands as she approached, wringing them nervously. Ayanna nodded gently. "Tell them what you told me." Barbara Marney exhaled shakily. "The wounds on the dead man, they weren't made by Holt. She demonstrated the angle with her hand. The cut was deeper angled, not from a fight, more like from someone standing behind him. Gasps echoed again, and he was already dead when one of the wounds was made, she whispered. His body was moved. Dirt on his clothes didn't match where he was found. Someone shouted, then it was staged, and the mortician nodded as tears filled her eyes. I have children. I feared speaking out. Ayanna placed a hand on her arm. You did the right thing. Whitcomb clenched his teeth so hard his jaw twitched. Now, Elias Boone rode into the center of the square, opened the notebook, and spoke with a voice that carried beyond what anyone expected from such a mild-looking man. I recorded these events under Whitcomb's orders. I was not allowed to question them, but I do not need to question to see patterns. He read the entries aloud, the time Whitcomb met the victim. The $50 advanced payment. The victim's noted fear. The private meeting between Whitcomb and the deputy shortly after the death. The land claim filed on tribal and mountain property following Holt's arrest. Shouts erupted throughout the square. He bought land stolen from natives. Holt was framed. Grady helped cover it all. Elias closed the book slowly. Whitcomb wanted land. Holt was merely a tool, a pawn. Sheriff Grady ensured the scheme stayed buried. For the first time in years, the truth had air to breathe. Whitcomb broke. His eyes darted wildly, as if searching for an escape route among the very people he once controlled. It's all lies, he screamed. Lies. No one believed him. He fumbled at his waistband, ripping out a revolver and aiming it at Caleb with a shaking hand. You think you can take me down? If I die, Holt dies with me? Women screamed. Men shoved their families behind them. The square exploded into chaos. But Caleb didn't run. He stood tall, steady, defiant. Whitcomb's finger tightened on the trigger. The gun fired. Ayanna moved before thought could catch up with instinct. She threw herself in front of Caleb. Ayanna, Caleb roared. Pain flashed across her shoulder as the bullet scraped past, deflected by a pile of lumber behind her. She staggered, but didn't fall. Whitcomb stumbled backward off balance from the recoil. Caleb surged forward like a striking wolf. In one swift motion, he grabbed Whitcomb's wrist, twisted sharply, and struck a blow to his forearm. The gun clattered to the ground. Whitcomb fell beside it, gasping. Caleb stood over him but didn't strike again, even though he easily could have. The message was clear. I'm no savage, he said, quietly voiced, trembling with fury. Not now, not ever. You wrote that story, not me. The crowd stared stunned. The cowboy they'd called a monster had shown more dignity than the man who'd framed him. But the danger wasn't over. One of Whitcomb's loyal gunmen hidden among the crowd raised his pistol and took aim at Ayanna. Ash saw it first. With a furious, thunderous whinny, the stallion charged from the side of the square. People leapt aside as the black horse barreled forward, hooves striking sparks against the hard-packed dirt. The gunman barely had time to turn before Ash slammed into him. The man tumbled backward, hitting the ground hard as the pistol skittered away. Ash planted his massive hooves inches from the man's head and released a fierce, echoing cry that filled the entire square. Children hid behind their parents. Adults stared in awe. That horse, he's protecting her. He understands. Ayanna didn't tame him. They chose each other. The narrative of who held power in Red Mesa shattered in that instant. Whitcomb swallowed hard, sweating as his entire empire collapsed around him. Sheriff, he shouted desperately. Do something. But Sheriff Grady stood frozen. For the first time, he realized the people no longer feared him. Eyes sharpened, faces hardened. Sheriff, someone shouted, you helped him do this. Grady backed away, denying sputtering, then turned to run. He didn't get far. Several townsfolk blocked his path, grabbing his arms and dragging him back into the center of the square. The corruption lay bare. There was no place left to hide it. Elias Boone raised his voice. Caleb Holt was wrongfully accused. All evidence points not to his guilt, but to a conspiracy led by Whitcomb and aided by Sheriff Grady. The crowd erupted in shouts, not of confusion now, but of fury and vindication. Free Holt. Try Whitcomb. Justice for the natives, justice for the truth. Jonas stepped forward and placed a tentative hand on Caleb's shoulder. Holt, I'm sorry, he whispered. For staying silent, for not standing up sooner. I'm sorry. Caleb looked at him, emotions flickering through his eyes, surprise, pain, and then acceptance. Thank you, he said quietly. Elias finished with a solemn declaration. As a representative of county records, I declare Caleb Holt an innocent man. Someone in the crowd shouted his name. Then another. Soon the whole square echoed, Caleb Holt, Caleb Holt. For the first time in months, maybe years, Caleb heard his name without venom, without condemnation, without fear. Ayanna stepped beside him, her voice soft but steady. You can finally call yourself by your true name again. He turned to her eyes shimmering with something deeper than gratitude. And in that moment, under the rising sun and the eyes of an entire town, Caleb Holt felt a weight fall from his shoulders, a weight so heavy he hadn't realized how long he'd been carrying it. Justice had begun. Red Mesa felt hollow after the shouting stopped. The square that had been packed shoulder to shoulder an hour before now lay half empty, scattered with trampled dust, dropped hats, and the echo of words that changed everything. People drifted away in clusters, some arguing under their breath, some walking in stunned silence, some glancing back over their shoulders as if afraid the scene might start all over again. In the middle of it, Ayanna stood still. The wind slid through the square, lifting the edge of her woven native cloak, tugging strands of her dark hair loose from their braid. She didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed in the strange, fragile quiet of a town trying to understand what it had just seen. Beside her, Caleb Holt stood as if the ground under him still wasn't real. For months, he'd been called everything except his name, killer, savage animal trash. Now the sound of Caleb Holt still hung faintly in the air, spoken not with hatred, but with something like respect. The noise of the crowd had faded, but the echo of it stayed lodged in his bones. A soft bump at his shoulder pulled him back to earth. Ash stepped closer, nudging Caleb with his muzzle as if to say, "You're still here. You're still breathing. Stay with us." The great black stallion snorted once, then swung his head between Caleb and Ayanna, sensing that something important hadn't been finished yet. Elias Boone slipped away with his notebook clutched tight, already thinking about affidavits and statements, and the journey to the county seat. Jonas melted into the thinning crowd, head bowed, but every time he glanced back, his eyes shone with gratitude toward Ayanna. The roar of confrontation had been replaced by a heavy, thoughtful hush, the kind of silence that comes after a storm when people aren't quite sure what the new landscape looks like. Ayanna turned to Caleb. "Come with me," she said quietly. They stepped away from the center of the square, finding a patch of shade beside an old hitching post. The town buzzed in the distance, but here it felt almost private. Ayanna untied the small leather pouch from her belt. Caleb watched, unsure. "What are you doing?" She held his gaze as she pressed the pouch into his palm. It was heavier than it looked, the exact weight of the silver she'd thrown onto the sheriff's table the day she'd stunned the entire town. "This," she said, "is what I paid for you." Caleb's hand clenched slowly around the pouch. His throat worked, but no sound came out. "I'm giving it back," Ayanna said. "You don't owe me anything." He stared at her confusion and something sharper flickering in his eyes. "You rode into a town that hates you. You bought a man they wanted dead. You stood between me and a bullet. And you're telling me I don't owe you?" Ayana's voice stayed calm, gentle but firm. "I told you once I didn't buy you. I bought your chance to choose your own life." Caleb's fingers tightened around the pouch until the leather creaked. He looked down at it as if it were some fragile, dangerous thing. "No one's ever said that to me," he murmured. "That I get to choose." Ayana's eyes softened. "Well, someone's saying it now." Ash stepped closer, lowering his head between the mirrors, flicking as if he understood every word. The three of them stood there for a moment, bound together by something that wasn't chains or debt or fear. For the first time, it was something else entirely. Ayana took a step back, giving him space. Her gaze was steady, clear. "You're free now, Caleb. Truly free. You can walk out of this town and never look back. Head north-south into the mountains, into the cities. You can leave Red Mesa. You can leave me. You can leave all of this behind." She nodded toward the courthouse, toward the people still arguing in the streets. "You don't owe this town anything. You don't owe my people anything. You don't even owe me your gratitude. Whatever you do next, that's your decision." Caleb looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. His mind flashed through a dozen moments in quick succession, the way she had stood in the auction yard and said, "I'll buy him," and his horse, the way she'd watched him by the campfire, letting him keep his distance. Her voice when she'd told him, "I keep a promise to the dead." Her body lunging in front of him when Whitcomb pulled the trigger. Her face pale from pain, still turned toward him as if to make sure he was alive. He thought about how Ash, wild and dangerous, had bowed his head only to her. How the stallion stood between them now, as if waiting to see which way the wind would blow. He drew in a breath, then another. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but the words were solid as stone. "Then I choose," he said, "to stay." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then the slightest smile touched Ayana's lips, not surprised, not triumphant, just quietly accepting. "Then we stay," she answered. "Together." Ash chose that exact moment to push his big head right between them again. He bumped Ayana's shoulder, nearly knocking her off balance, then swung to nudge Caleb in the chest. His breath huffed out warm and insistent, as if announcing something to the world. Caleb chuckled under his breath. "He's not giving us much room, is he?" "No," Ayana said, resting her hand against Ash's neck. "I think he likes his herd just the way it is." Caleb reached up and scratched along the stallion's jawline. Ash closed his eyes, halfway leaning into the touch, sharing his weight between the two humans who had somehow, against all odds, become his people. In that quiet, strange little triangle, man, woman, horse, something settled. Not a pact spoken aloud, not a promise demanded. Just an understanding we belong to no one, but we will stand for each other. A family rough-edged and unconventional had been forged in fire. Word of what had happened in the square spread faster than any rider could carry it. By sundown, Red Mesa was a town split in two. In the saloon, voices rose and fell over clinking glasses. "It's about damn time someone stood up to Whitcomb," one rancher said, slamming his drink down. "He's been stealing land from natives and cowhands both for years." Across the room, another man snorted. "Oh, sure. Now everyone pretends they didn't know. Next thing you tell me, we're handing over the town to that red leaf girl." She exposed the truth, someone shot back, and Holt helped. On the main street near the general store, a pair of women argued while hanging laundry. "You saw the same thing I saw," one insisted. "That girl stepped in front of a bullet for him. That horse risked his life, too. You tell me that's not worth a little respect." The other shook her head. "She's a native. If they get bold, we don't know what comes next. Everywhere it was the same, some people speaking Ayana's name with cautious hope, others spitting it out like a warning. Some saying Red Mesa needed to change, others muttering that change was just another word for losing control. But for the first time, no one stood up to defend Whitcomb. No one dared claim the sheriff had simply followed the law. A crack had appeared in the old foundation. Through that crack, light started to leak in. In the days that followed, more people stepped forward. A native farmer hat crushed between his hands came to Elias with deeds and old maps showing how his land had been seized after accidents that suddenly didn't look like accidents at all. A widowed woman arrived next, clutching letters her husband had written before his mysterious death in a dispute over grazing rights. She told how Whitcomb's men had threatened her into silence. "I didn't speak up," she whispered, "because I was afraid my boys would pay for it. Maybe they still will. But I can't keep my mouth shut anymore." Elias took every statement down carefully, ink scratching across paper hands, steadier now than they'd been in years. County representatives arrived from Yavapai, summoned by his urgent dispatches and the sheer volume of testimony spilling out. Whitcomb's big house on the hill was sealed, its doors nailed shut, accounts frozen. Every time someone told the truth, Red Mesa's old shadow grew thinner. The cost of silence, stacked up over 10 years, was finally being counted. On the edge of town, near the scrub and low hills, an old lodge that had once belonged to the Redleaf family stood half-collapsed. Ayana and Caleb rebuilt it. They worked side by side beneath the hot sun, pulling rotten boards, driving in new nails, tying beams and supports with rope when they ran out of iron. Ash grazed nearby or watched from under a mesquite tree ears, twitching eyes following every movement. Caleb showed her how to brace the new corral posts so they wouldn't sag, how to patch a saddle with scraps of leather, how to teach Ash new hand signals so they could ride silently when they needed to. In turn, Ayana taught him how to read the desert. "See those tracks," she said one morning, crouching by a faint impression in the dust. "That's a coyote. But he's limping, see where the weight shifts." She let the sand run through her fingers. "Wind changed last night. Smell that rain 2 days away, maybe 3. The mountains speak. You just have to listen long enough." At first, there was a careful space between them, old habits, old wounds keeping a polite distance. They didn't crowd each other. They didn't pry. But slowly the space narrowed. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside the rebuilt lodge, Caleb found himself talking about the first time he'd killed a man in self-defense and how long the nightmares had lasted afterward. Ayana told him how the sound of keys in a jailer's hand still made her sick because it reminded her of the night they let her father away. When the memories grew heavy, Ash would nudge them both as if reminding them that they weren't alone in the dark anymore. Bit by bit, trust sprouted, fragile but persistent. Ayana soothed parts of Caleb that had been clenched so long he'd forgotten they weren't supposed to hurt. Caleb shouldered burdens for her, taking the weight where her grief had left scars. The stallion was the silent bridge between them, a breathing, pounding heart promise that they could build something new without belonging to anyone. The news from Yavapai finally returned. Whitcomb was to stand trial for murder, bribery, land theft, and conspiracy. The charges were long enough to fill a page. The evidence, thanks to Elias and the people who had finally spoken, was overwhelming. He was led away in irons, not as a powerful land baron, but as a criminal stripped of all illusions. Sheriff Grady was removed from his post pending investigation for aiding and abetting. He no longer wore a badge when he walked through town. People moved aside for him now, not out of respect, but out of contempt. Red Mesa had lost its old rulers. In their place, a question remained. What kind of town will we choose to be now? One evening, the sky burned orange and red over the serrated silhouette of the mountains. Dust glowed in the slanting light. Crickets were just starting to sing. Ayanna, Caleb, and Ash stood on a small rise near the lodge, looking out at the trail that led away from Red Mesa out into a west that was still wild, still dangerous, still full of men like Whitcomb and towns like the one they had just changed. "Father wanted me to protect the innocent," Ayanna said quietly. "I thought that meant taking blows, surviving, existing in the cracks so no one could use me against my people." She exhaled slowly. "Now I think maybe he wanted me to do this instead. To stand where everyone could see." Caleb looked at her, the fading light catching the angles of his face, softening the hardness that used to live there. "I've spent a long time letting the world tell me what I was," he said. "Trash, savage, monster, useful muscle if they needed a job done. This is the first time I've chosen to stand somewhere because I believe in what it means." He glanced at Ash and then at the dusty trail. "There are other towns like Red Mesa," he said. "Other men like Whitcomb, other people like us caught in the middle, blamed, used, thrown away." Ayanna nodded. "We can't fix all of it." "No," Caleb agreed. "But we can start with wherever our feet land." Ash snorted, as if impatient with all the talking. He pawed at the ground muscles, bunching, eager for the feel of open trail beneath his hooves. Ayanna smiled and laid a hand on his neck. "He wants to move." Caleb swung into the saddle and then reached a hand down to her. She took it light but sure and settled in front of him. Ash shifted his weight, ready. Behind them, Red Mesa flickered with lamplight, still divided, still arguing, still changing. Ahead of them, the land stretched wide and unknown. 3 living beings, Ayanna murmured half to herself. All once treated like property, all still here. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins, then eased them forward. "Not property," he said. "Not anymore. We ride because we choose to." Ash stepped onto the trail, head-high, ears pricked toward the horizon. Above them, the evening sky over Red Mesa opened up in gentle shades of gold and crimson, as if a door had been left ajar to something new. And together, a native woman with her father's courage, a cowboy with a name finally cleared, and a stallion who'd chosen his own family, they rode toward it, carrying their scars, their freedom, and their right to choose exactly where their story went next. Thank you for spending your time with this story and walking this journey alongside us. If it moved you, surprised you, or made you feel something, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps these stories live on and reach more hearts.